No idea why I seem to be called Nisa Finney.
How lucky you are, Tony. How lucky you are. We're having a bit of trouble with this on the technical side. Many people are arriving in the meeting as Nisa Finney for reasons unknown to us. You can change the name that appears, which please do, by going to the top right hand side of your little screen where there are 3 white dots in a blue square, and clicking on that to reveal a menu. About halfway down that menu, there's an option to rename yourself.
Can't see it. No, I've given up.
You're far better as Nisa Finney, Tony. Just be happy.
Hello, Alan.
Good to see you and everybody else.
Oh, yes, Bill's Nisa Finney as well.
I am, yes. Aren't I the lucky one? I can't change it either. Nothing. I only get speaker in gallery if I go to the top right hand side. So I can't get a name change.
It's not to fiddle with things.
No.
It's the top right hand side of the little personal screen, not the screen itself.
And the view.
So you're in the view. You have a tiny little personal, part of the screen, and there on the top right hand side there are 3 dots.
Aha.
Hi everyone, by the way.
Hi Clara. Ollie, I think you're also popping up as Nisa. This is very comical, isn't it?
We're here.
Sorry, am I also to be seen as Nisa Finney?
No, Clara, you're Clara.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, Katrina too. Hello. Hi. Good to see you.
And you, Bill. Nice to see everyone.
Welcome everybody to this 50th anniversary celebration of the Population Geography Research Group. I'm Nisa Finney from the University of St Andrews, and thank you all for coming along to this event this afternoon. We're here to reflect on and celebrate 5 decades of population geography supported by the Population Geography Research Group. Research groups within the Royal Geographical Society with the Institute of British Geographers are the formal route through which the Society supports collaborations, collectives of researchers around particular fields of geographical inquiry. And PopGRG is the oldest of the RGS IBG research and working groups, of which there are now 32 groups. Several years ago, the PopGRG committee committed to celebrating the 50th anniversary of the research group. So this event that we're in now is part of the 50th anniversary festival of the research group. And within this festival, we have a number of activities that have been going on and continue to take place. The first of these is a population geography image competition, which was run in partnership with a school of Sanctuary in Swansea, a primary school. And that was led by Sergey, and you can see some of the fantastic winning entries to this competition on the screen behind me. As part of the festival, we've also had several blogs published on popgeog.org website reflecting on population geography. And there is a brand new one out today by Sophie and David. So please do have a look at that later. Another part of the 50th anniversary festival has been a co-authored paper, an editorial introduction by committee members to a virtual special issue of the journal Area, reflecting on 50 years of population geography and collating a set of papers published within RGS IBG journals over that time. So that's been led by Bonnie with co-authorship from the whole of the committee. And I'm really delighted to let you know that that special issue is now available as of yesterday, and the link will be posted in the chat very shortly. So please do read that, and we're very grateful for your responses to it. A very important aspect of our 50th festival anniversary is the archiving project. And in this project, we've looked at RGS archives, at reports within the journal Area, and we have interviewed 14 eminent population geographers or geographers doing population research, who have at some point had involvement with the research group. And I want to express the gratitude of the committee to those people who we interviewed for your time, your expertise, and your very honest reflections on the subdiscipline and the research group. Thank you. Thank you also to the RGS IBG, who supported that archiving project with a research group grant that allowed us to transcribe those interviews. We undertook the interviews in 2019 and 2020 and have over the last year embarked on a collaborative writing process with members of the committee to produce a draft paper that has analysed, interpreted, reflected on the material in those interviews. And we hope that before very long, this paper will be available for you to read. You have, however, a first sight of the ideas within it in the presentations today. This paper, the archiving project, will form the basis of the presentations this afternoon. So today's event is broadly divided into two halves. In the first half, we'll have presentations, and in the second half, there's opportunity for comment, questions, and your own reflections. So David, Sergey, and Sophie will begin with presentations from the archiving project, and we'll then hear reflections from our invited panel, who have had sight of both the Area Virtual Special Issue introduction and the draft archiving project paper. And I'm really, really delighted that Phil, George, James, Sarah, Brenda and Catherine are able to be with us today and contribute from their areas of expertise and experience, their reflections on population geography and PopGRG. Francisco will give fuller introductions to our panel a little later on. I hope that already in this short introduction and in the lovely chat that was beginning as we entered this meeting, you are getting a sense of the collaborative and collegiate nature of PopGRG and population geography more generally. This has certainly been my experience. And it's in this spirit that we want to hold this event today, to maintain that collegiality. And in the curation of it, we've tried to include different voices and invite a diversity of perspectives from both within and without population geography. With this in mind, we very much want your engagement in the event this afternoon. We'll move through the presentations in the first half without oral comments and questions. But I do encourage you to make full use of the chat, posting your comments, your questions, your reflections in there, so that we can respond to them either in the discussion or at a later point, or look at them afterwards for our reflections on the whole of this conversation. The event is also being live tweeted by Paula and Catherine, so please do join that conversation at PGRG_RGSIBG, hashtag PopGRG is 50. And for the question and answer, please also post your questions, your comments, reflections within the chat. And then Gemma, who is chairing that session, will ask you to speak your comment or question to the whole meeting. So I do encourage you to have your cameras on. It's lovely to see the faces, and thanks to those of you who do have cameras on just now. But I also appreciate some people might have technical troubles. Some people might want to eat their sandwiches during the course of the presentations. So that's fine too if you want to switch your camera off for a little while. For those of you who haven't had enough by 2 o'clock and want to continue the conversation, this meeting will formally close at 2, but the Zoom room will stay open for anybody who wants to stay around, have a chat, converse a little bit more. So you're very welcome to stay afterwards. So enjoy this conversation, which I hope will be the beginning rather than the conclusion of discussions about what the next 50 years of population geography and PopGRG will bring. And on that note, I will hand over to David for the first of the afternoon's presentations.
Thank you very much, Nisa, and thank you for everyone else for coming. It's wonderful to be able to share this event with you and this celebration with you today. So before we begin to hear from the panelists and their reflections, and hear your reflections, of course, as well, we thought it'd be interesting to just briefly run through a brief timeline of what we've been doing over the last 50 years to try and think about some of the really exceptional contributions the population geographers have made over that time period. So as Nisa was saying, recently as a committee, we have been undertaking interviews with some prominent members of the Population Geography Research Group. And based on that material and plus a little bit of online detective work, we've tried to create this timeline. So the timeline is now on the Population Geography Research Group website. It's also in the chat. So if you like to open that now, you can have a little look at it. For the purposes of allowing the panelists time to speak and for conversation, I'm not going to share my screen, but what I'll do is I'll talk through some of the highlights of the group. It's very much a living document. And as I said, a lot of this has involved quite a lot of detective work online. So if you do see any omissions or any inaccuracies, please do let us know. As you're looking through, please use the chat function, as Nisa was saying, to try and offer some of your feedback and your reflections and some of the things we've been up to over the last 50 years. So as I was saying, it's a living document. We welcome your feedback. You can post in the chat. You can write to me afterwards if there's anything that you think we should amend. So just to pick out a few highlights over the last 50 years or so, if you click on the link and you go to the left-hand side, you can basically see the genesis of the research group in the late 1960s, early 1970s. There's a little bit of uncertainty in our point regarding how exactly and when exactly the study group actually started. So if anyone has any particular insights on that, we'd really love to hear some information so we can fill in a few of the gaps there. Fast forwarding perhaps to the early 1980s, we see the launch of annual study group news sheets, which later became the group's newsletter, which we take from the interviews was a really important area of communication. throughout the group in the early stages. If we move forward to the 1990s, we can see the launch of the International Journal of Population Geography. And around this period as well, we also see the merger of the IBG and the RGS, and therefore the transition of the group from a study group to a research group, which has implications for impact, for policy. We might discuss that later on as well. In 2002, we had the launch, the inaugural International Conference for Population Geographies, which was held at the University of St Andrews. 2004, the International Journal of Population Geography was rebranded as Population Space and Place, and of course it's gone on to thrive since then. 2016, so 5 years ago, we had the inaugural IMIG conference, which was held at the University of Loughborough. And this year, of course, as Nisa was saying, we have a series of events to celebrate the Golden Jubilee of the research group. And then finally, next year, we're planning on hosting the third IMIG conference at the University of St Andrews in July, which is quite timely because that's exactly 20 years since the first international conference on population geography was launched at the same venue. So hopefully that'll be nice from that perspective as well. And we hope to welcome many of you to that conference in due course. So that was a very, very brief overview of some of the key achievements. And I think, as a community, we can be proud of what we've achieved over the last 50 years, and we can look forward to another 50 years at least of continued success. So in a moment, I'll hand over to my colleagues, Sergey and Sophie, just to offer some more reflections about the evolution and the direction of the research group. But just a final reminder to please comment on the chat in terms of inaccuracies or omissions or general reflections on the timeline, because as I said, it's not a fait accompli, it's a living document which we're hoping to evolve. And thank you to Bonnie as well for some of the technical support in getting the timeline together. Thanks.
So moving over from thinking about some of the key events of population geography through the 50 years, we want to now move on to some of the stories of population geography from the archiving interviews that we did. And just to note that while we did 14 interviews, we acknowledge that this is only a partial data set, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit more in detail at the end. So what I'm going to do is to talk to you a little bit about how the group operated over the 50 years, and then Sergey is going to talk to you about what this means in terms of how we understand what population geography is. So to start off with, one of the key things that came out of the interviews was the friendly and collegial nature of the group. And this is a really key point to note, because throughout the interviews, throughout the 50 years of the research group, this friendly and collegial nature has really shaped how the group has operated. And we can see this in the emergence of the group. As David said, we don't actually know exactly when it started. And that's because we can see the emergence of the population geography group as a kind of spontaneous outcome of meetings and personal connections. These ideas about personal connections and spontaneity and collegiality really shaped the operations of the group in the 1970s and 80s. And there was a clear sense of the group members taking it in turns to say, well, it's your turn to do an event, or I would like to do this event, and so on. In the 1990s, things began to change a little bit, and this is because there was a formalization of the strategies that were involved. And we can see this in the context of the changing context of UK higher education. However, while there became more formalized strategies, the friendly and collegial nature did not change. And this friendly and collegial nature also operated through how people got involved with the research group itself. So there's a clear sense of how did the research group reproduce? Well, it was through involvement with PhD supervisors and attendance at conferences. And we feel that this quote here on the slide from one of our interview participants really sums up how the group operated: good mates and good chums, working together on a range of different issues. Now, this friendly and collegial nature is something we should definitely celebrate. However, we do also need to acknowledge what its limitations are on how the research group has operated and how this impacts upon how we understand population geography. So we can think about how, okay, so all of these personal connections and personal networks, is in some ways represents a sort of narrow understanding of population geography. And we have here on the slide an example of the geographical narrowness of the population geography research group in how it was really framed around British geography and representing British population geography as population geography more generally. In terms of the narrowness of networks, we can also see this in terms of whose voices were involved in population geography. And one of the questions we asked our interview respondents is, how does population geography represent the population? And there were two key themes that came out from this question. One was about gender, and we can see a clear shift in the group from women becoming more welcomed in the group, however remaining somewhat on the margins in terms of being a person taking notes as opposed to actively shaping the group's agenda, to more recently where we've seen women leading the group. And Nissa has actually been our first female chair of the Population Geography Research Group from 2016, and it's a legacy that I'm really pleased to continue. However, the other issue that came up in terms of the narrowness of the group was in ethnicity. And it's very clear, as you can see on the quote in the slide there, that the Population Geography Research Group does not reflect the population as a whole. And that is a challenge for us going forward. Because, excuse me, one of the things that we can think about in terms of the friendliness and collegiality of the research group is what kind of atmosphere does this create? Is this atmosphere something that is inclusive only for certain groups of the population? And we can see here on the slide, and I really love this quote about how population geographers differed from other types of geography, and this is a reflection from the 1980s, that the population geographers were softer, less macho and kind. These ideas about kindness in population geography is something that we really want to celebrate, and is something that we want to think about how we continue in the next 50 years. So that's a very, again, as David did, a very sort of brief and sort of potted history of who was involved in the population group and how did they operate. I'm now going to pass over to Sergey to talk about what this means in terms of how we understand the population itself. So Sergey.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So if I can switch on to the next slide, please. So we were very lucky with very interesting and reflective comments from the interviewees who reflected on the changes in terms of how population geography developed and changed its subject. So from kind of early years, they reflected on the fact that population geography was pretty much concerned with the mass of human beings, so in a classical population geography sense. And at the time, in the words of one of the interviewee, it was concerned with the issues of how population is collectively identified, how it's counted, how it's measured, how its characteristics are delimited. So some interviews spoke about the interdisciplinary identity that was based on specific foundations, such as concern with population data or understanding of the public. These are the quotes. However, self-reflexivity in population geography meant that the scholars continuously ask questions about the place of population, as well as particular knowledge that gets expressed through it. As many interviews acknowledged, most of the early population research seemed very UK-centered, drawing, and I quote, largely on a geographic basis rather than on so much on methodologically or ideologically, unquote. The cultural turn raised broader questions about population, prompting geographers to reconsider, and I quote, the context of our knowledge, the context of our actions, and the context of a social structure in which we are engaged, unquote. Recognition of the unstable identities and non-human actors co-producing the seemingly coherent human lives undermined the early assumptions about the existence of holistic populations that can be considered within more or less static points of reference. Going beyond the study of spatial distribution of bodies, analysis of population developed at a more general biopolitical level to include the possibilities of life and death beyond this that can be observed or experienced. In addition to its traditional focus, population geographers are increasingly concerned with the different living matter, biological processes such as viruses affecting living beings, something which we experience today, and broader questions of life in general, which involves, in the word of one of the interviews, doing kind of different things other than population geography, unquote. The next slide, please. So how can we think about population differently? What sort of alternative conceptual approaches can we deploy, drawing on these quotes? Well, one of the possible broader approaches to population thinking, borrowing from the words of Deleuze and Guattari, prioritizes fluidity over stability, moving towards an entire range of relative forms to select from, none of which is pre-established. So redefinition of its field of research and interconnections between these different fields has contributed to reconfiguration of the subdiscipline towards the broader, what we could call life activity. As one of the interviewees stressed, more critical versions of population geography, and I quote, have to raise questions about whether population geography should also sometimes wonder about non-human populations, unquote. So broadening of the scale and position identity of population geography confounded clear-cut separations between the accepted binaries, which we all deal with, place and placelessness, home away, which kind of were very prominent within the subdiscipline. It also questioned the place of population geography itself, an accepted territory of analysis. So while certain achievements and core expertise of population analysis continue to be valued in population studies, there is also a push to include other influences, other skills, other voices. As one of the interviewees here says, we need to refer to bigger trajectories in the horizons of science, philosophy, and not just Western science and philosophy too. So in the next slide, we kind of thought about how we can move forward. And one of these approaches, which we kind of assume we can draw, which can incorporate that aliveness of population geography, is perhaps drawing on the work of Deleuze and Guattari, which they described as a science of multiplicities. As one of our interviewees stressed, more critical versions of population geography need to raise these questions about multiple, variable, changing populations, which involves continuous re-evaluation of boundaries within a subdiscipline and different links beyond it. So thinking difference at the level of populations implies the emphasis on the relations across different elements, such as culture, society, non-organic life producing spatial patterns, rather than the nature of these elements themselves. In the words of one of our interviewees, such approach can help, and I quote, to redefine things, relationships, focus on population, on the environment, unquote. This means, and as another interviewer says, we don't want to accept a narrow population geography. We engage across geography, unquote. In this case, we can offer multiple ways of defining space and place. So interviews describe population geography as having the potential to be a central cog for interdisciplinary studies, dealing with the big debates which we are all facing in geography in a broader sense. Others articulate ambitions for population geography to be more proactive in scholarship on development, equality, family, and climate, engaging boldly and critically. So this vision that emerges from our interviews for future population geography is of a subdiscipline that retains its foundations of fluidity and utility and combines this with critical engagement with contemporary global challenges. Thank you. That's to you, Sophia.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here and for joining this event. So now we are going to have our panelists who are going to provide a reflection on pop geography, population geography in general, but also about our group. So thank you for the speakers on accepting our invitation, providing the reflection that they're going to provide in a few minutes. So I'm going to have the difficult job of trying to keep you on time. So excuse me if I have to pressure a bit. So we have 5 minutes per speaker, and we are going to have a round of questions later on. So I would ask everyone who may have questions during the reflections to either wait until the Q&A session, or just feel free to use the chat box on the bottom of the screen and write your question there. So we're going to be collecting all of those questions and then use them for later discussion. So now I'm going to introduce each of the speakers. And as I said, so we'll have 5 minutes per speaker. So the first speaker that we have, and I have the pleasure to introduce, is Professor Phil Rees. Professor Phil Rees is an emeritus professor of population geography at the University of Leeds, completed studies at the Universities of Cambridge and Chicago in the United States. He has made significant contributions to research, particularly on migration, how to incorporate migration into population projection models and forecasts. Professor Rees is the recipient of numerous prizes and awards, including the Gill Memorial Award of the RGS IBG in 1996, Fellow of the British Academy, Commander of the British Empire, Victoria Medal of the RGS IBG, and Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. Thank you, Professor Phil. So the floor is all yours.
I'm going to share my screen and try and load my PowerPoint. Is that in screen mode now? Can people see that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I should say there's virtually no overlap between this presentation and my interview transcript, which I find a very difficult process to go through. And I'm sure basically my transcript didn't read very well at all. But I do endorse the remarks of Sophie, that essentially population geography research study group and then research group was a very friendly place, encouraged younger people to join in and create the discipline or improve the discipline. So I want to cover 9 topics, 2 minutes, 30 seconds each. They're linked to my career, and I'll then link them to a wider body of studies. Social geography of cities or urban geography, access to census data, which I feel is absolutely essential. Design of small areas, which PopGRG members contributed to. The growth of geodemographics, a huge industry now, the employers geographers. Something about internal migration patterns and processes, particularly the work of Tony Champion and Tony Fielding and colleagues. International conferences and collaborations have already been mentioned, very important to talk to people within the UK and the whole of the world. Analysis of forecasting and then forecasting of population change, which is a favorite subject of mine, and a little cartoon to wake you all up at the end of the talk before I finish with a plea that we must be relevant in our research. Research impact is vital, otherwise we'll be swallowed by STEM. Oops. Need to move to the next slide. So, okay, social geography, right. So when I did my master's and PhD back in Chicago, I was using factor analysis, a sophisticated technique invented by psychologists back in the 1930s, and that became factorial ecology when we applied to small areas and cities. Socioeconomic indicators derived from that analysis, classifications of areas, and then a lot of work on indexes of segregation and integration. So I think that knowledge, that stream of methodology has actually spanned the 50 years, but some of it has fallen away. So factorial ecology has essentially dropped off the screen in an application to urban geography, but it's still widely used to see the wood for the trees in a lot of places. The socioeconomic indicators that we developed from our factorial ecology have actually morphed into what are called indexes of multiple deprivation. Very important for informing governments in the UK in particular about the needs of different communities. So that's impact on welfare policies reduction of inequality. And then the classification of communities became geodemographics, which has been a huge industry. And I'll say a little bit in a later slide about how we helped in population geography trigger off that explosion of work. Huge interest in the segregation or integration at residential small area scale of ethnic groups as well as other kinds of groups. And there's a consultation going on at the moment by ONS who are wishing to engage in more of that research. So I've referred them all back to Ethnicity of the 1991 Census, a 4-volume collaborative OPCS, as was an academic collaboration.
Sorry, Phil, just a quick ask. So if we could speed up a bit because we have 4 minutes and a half already. Thank you.
Okay. The essence of this slide is that when I was a PhD student, I went along to a professor at my university and said, can I borrow your magnetic tapes and read off some data for cities? And the answer, and this was US Bureau of Census data, and the answer was no, bugger off, to use a phrase. So that sort of scarred my my brain for a number of years. I thought I'm going to do something about it. And I was given the opportunity by the Economic and Social Research Council to head up the census program with the essential goal of agreeing the kind of statistics that are produced from the census and making them available to as many users as possible in the academic community and later in the outside world, free at the point of use. And I think we've achieved that. Myself, David Martin, my successor, John Stillwell, his successor, have persuaded the official statistics agencies to actually do that and make it available to anyone in the world. So that's the principle, is give the people back their data.
Phil, sorry, excuse me a moment. So would you mind if I throw you a challenge? If we could try to capture all of this in the last minute or so, and then probably we can come back to this during the Q&A session.
Okay.
Just to allow enough time for all the speakers.
Yeah, just a sentence on each slide then. The design of small areas. You've all probably used output areas. Well, they're an invention of geographers, particularly David Martin, who took his sabbatical leave in ONS and working, co-producing with ONS Geography and ONS Census, the outputs we all dearly love. That was built on the work of my former colleague Stan Openshaw, who produced the zoning design algorithm. That led to the creation of rich data sets at that small area scale, led to the creation of the geodemographics industry. Why? Because ESRC's purchase of the data from ONS made it was free to anyone to start a business, a consultancy, and kind of nudge out the big players who were able to afford the millions of quid for buying the census data before that. Dan Vickers and I developed the official classification of small areas. Population geography, I refer you to the long-standing interest of the group. In particular, Tony Champion and Tony Fielding have contributed and are still contributing over the decades to this. An important collection in 1992, and then that was reviewed by current members of the committee here, a new evaluation of what had happened since that marker book back in 1992. And in the last couple of years, even under COVID, we still continue to review what had been happening in our study of internal migration. Two special issues there. International conferences, other people will say a lot about that, but they encourage collaboration. So there's an example there of an international research project organized by Martin Bell at the University of Queensland, and he was determined that we were going to be on the map of international demographic statistics with some coefficients, some indexes that would describe the amount of internal migration in each country. A very difficult problem because of the dependence of those measures on a number of areas and their design. So to summarize, population geography in terms of international statistics with a Cinderella, and Martin Bell and colleagues have turned it into the belle of the ball.
Phil, could we draw it to a closure and
Yes,
then
yeah,
come back
I'm
for
getting
the
there.
rest?
I won't go into the detail of contributions that population geographers have made to population projection and forecasting, but definitely we put the geography in there because enormously prestigious demographers simply ignored that. And I have persuaded both Andre Rogers in America that international migrants were absolutely essential to include in the work. And I've persuaded Wolfgang Lutz in Vienna that he had to get into international migration properly and seriously. So that's been my contribution in nudging that field forward. However, we're still struggling to get ONS to understand what we want. And here's my cartoon to wake you all up. Infant migrants. They're the babies that are born during the year before the census, or the 5 years before the census, and they are recorded somewhere else when they appear in the census. And those have been continually missed out, forgotten about. So please pay attention to that banner and include, if you any responsibility in ONS, include those babies in our new publications from the 2021. Just one final word about the importance of studying relevant subjects, making a contribution to world-leading problems. So we've been working away, a lot of us, on COVID tasks. And just to mention that Paul Norman and I have been trying to put right the very poor denominators in all the calculations of rates for COVID infection cases and deaths. It really is a pretty poor situation. We simply don't know for ethnic groups what the population is. We're measuring the denominator, how many people have been infected or died, but we're not measuring the denominator to get a proper rate. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Phil. And sorry for speeding you up, but just to provide enough time for everyone to be able to provide their reflections. Thank you again, Phil. So hopefully we're going to come back for questions regarding some of the things that you have covered. So our second speaker is George Tan. So joining from Australia, very far away. Thank you for staying up this late. So George is a research fellow at the Northern Institute at Charles Darwin University. He was previously a research associate at the Hugo Center for Migration at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and at the Population and Public Health Information Development Unit before. So George research interest focuses on migration and population research. Particularly, he focuses on international migration, looking at an expand of different international migration processes regarding international students, skilled migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Over to you, George.
Thank you, Francisco. So I'd like to begin by firstly acknowledging the Larrakia people, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land that I'm speaking to you from, and I pay my respects to the Larrakia elders past, present, and emerging. So it is a privilege to be a part of your event. I'd also like to thank Nisa, Sophie, and Gemma for inviting me to celebrate 50 years of the population geography group. Now, in preparation for this, it was really good to read the 2 papers, on how population geography as a subdiscipline in the UK has traveled for the last 50 years. And the themes that were articulated, which highlighted the diversity of the work, the richness, complexity, the depth, but also some of the characteristics of your group that are not necessarily academic. And I think Sophie and Sergey touched on earlier. And I think these are traits I think have been and will continue to be important ingredients in the evolution and the flourishing of population geography in the UK, not just for the last 50 years, but also beyond. And I think one of the things that stood out to me as one of the distinctive features that was noted in interviews in the archiving paper was the collegiality that was seen and felt within a group. And I think to some extent, I think this is something that's fundamental, that's needed for the other aspects that were touched on to develop, not just in relation to the material production of books, papers, events and conferences, but also when it comes to the aspect of fluidity and adaptability of population geography and how it has been able to increase its range and scope from mainly demographic, quantitative, heavy type of research in the 90s to now thinking about population in places and how population geography often links into other disciplines like sociology and economics. And I think from where I sit over here, I think the friendliness which seems to exude from this group, I think it's important if we are to listen and engage with colleagues that are both senior but also emerging within and outside of the group, to be able to have reasoned debate, to have an environment where we can stimulate and shift thinking. I think this quality has been and will continue to be important. And it will help in the conditioning of the fluidity and adaptability of population geography. But also, I think as the paper also touched on, it's important to help resist the academic culture of individualization that has been fostered by the neoliberal processes that we see in universities. So personally, I have noted this culture amongst geographers based in the UK for quite some time. And preparing for this event, I reached out to a colleague of mine at another university in Australia earlier this week, and she also shared my sentiment. She felt that geographers in the UK seem to support each other a lot more. You guys seem to be a lot more connected, and it's a lot less cutthroat in comparison to our personal experiences in Australia. And I think this is obviously just my opinion and also hers. I'm not going to name her, but I do apologize to any Australian geographers or those who have worked in Australia who might have had different experiences or views of the overall culture here. I think Francisco was based at University of Queensland a while ago, so you might have something to say about what I've just touched on. But I must say, I do have really good relationships with other geographers across Australia. It's not exactly doom and gloom over here, but from observing and also reading the papers that were sent to me, maybe I'm a little bit envious of the culture that you have over there. And so one more thing before I finish up, I just want to quickly touch on the vitality and utility of population geography that was touched on in the paper. I mean, the comments from the interviews noted also how population geographers seem to be missing in debates in the UK, whether they be Brexit or COVID-19 or what have you. I think similarly, there is a similar public perception or a lack of awareness, really, when it comes to geography or population geography in Australia as well. I think in the migration space over here, where a lot has happened, or really not happened with international border closures, but also internal border closures between the different states and territories, it's really changed how people move within Australia as well. And I think a lot of this debate, whether it's international migration or internal migration in Australia, it's been dominated by demographers and also economists and think tanks who are very significant voices in the public discourse. So similarly, I do see the same challenges presenting itself, and maybe perhaps a little more acutely in Australia. And I think over here, we also need to consider how we can position population geography, the qualities that we have and our relevance not only to big issues, but also the global challenges that we face, and also domestic issues, such as how we might start to move away from how we conduct our 5-yearly census to something that starts to resemble big data approaches in the future. All right, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Excellent. Thank you, George, for keeping it within the time. And yeah, I just can confirm what you just said. So I think there are different cultures regarding population geography in Australia and in the UK, and it's a lot more collegial here, like you say. So I guess moving on to our third speaker, so James Esson. So James is a reader in human geography at the Department of Geography and Environment at Loughborough University. He focuses on 3 different research areas: the relationship between global inequality and clandestine mobility, the impact of immigration policies on international student mobilities, and the relationship of population, aging, mobility, and urbanization. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Francisco. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that is all good.
Fantastic. So I want to begin by just saying a big thank you to the PopGRG research group for organising this event, and also say a big well done for your archival work. It seems really fantastic. I look forward to seeing the final version of the article, and also for sharing the virtual special editorial as well. I really enjoyed reading both pieces of work. So again, big thank you for that and for inviting me today. I'm going to try and keep my talk to the 5 minutes and keep it relatively short. I've got slides, but there's only 2, and they're there more as a visual aid for myself, if anything, rather than giving you lots of information and content. So I guess to keep it quite to the point, when I read the document that kind of, well, the paper that will emerge based on the archival work, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed reading it. There's lots of fascinating insights, but something about that left me a little bit uneasy, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And I spent the last couple of weeks trying to think it through. And I realized that what it actually was is that in the section we talked about diversifying population geography, I realized it was very much a call from the center to the margins to participate in the discipline, to diversify it. And I thought to myself, what are the implications of that call? And more importantly, were we confusing the social location of how research is conducted with the epistemic location from which it emerges? So what I mean by that is, in many ways, we're trying to diversify population geography, which I think was a fantastic move. But through doing so, and Sophie kind of highlighted some of her concerns about that earlier on, I realized that was very much a case of, as I said, the center calling to the margins, as it were, to participate in the move to decolonize. And I guess I almost want to give a little bit of caution here. I'm not saying this because I think there's an essential kind of notion of what the margin is, nor am I the person to determine how a decolonial move should take place. My point is simply, on the one hand, we are calling to diversify the discipline. I wasn't sure about what we were going to do to our disciplinary norms and conventions to make that diversification work. So on what terms are we diversifying population geography? I guess what I'm trying to get us to think through. Because if the aim is to decolonize the discipline, as the paper called for, how are we going to try and address the very ways in which coloniality is being reproduced currently? So I guess that's what I want us to kind of think through more broadly, but perhaps in the Q&A later on today. So I guess to summarize, my point here is really that as part of the call to diversify population geography, there's lots of calls about internationalizing, about, for example, there's really fantastic quotes about how so much work is written about China without actually engaging with Chinese scholarship, which I think is fantastic. But that's very much a move about the social location of research production, not the epistemological case for how research is being produced. I hope is that clear? Yeah, okay. Can we go to the next slide, please, just to keep it moving? And then I guess what I also found really interesting, so looking at the area editorial special issue, this links back to my point about the legacies of coloniality, is that actually, does anybody recognize the person on this slide? Does anybody know who that is? Well, who I hope it is, based on Google. Anyone in the chat? Anyone able to unmute themselves? Well, It probably is if Chris Philo says it's John Dee. So I might need to go back and look again in Google. But I was trying to find an image of William Petty, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who is strongly associated with, I guess, demography in the 17th century. And the reason I say this is because some of you may or may not be aware of William Petty, who did lots of stuff around what came to be known as political arithmetic, which is trying to calculate the financial wealth of a population. And a lot of this work was also involved with trying to understand the spatial demographic characteristics of a population, the movement of populations, and the characteristics of places. Now, I hope you will realize that those are the three themes that emerge through the area special issue that you put together, the three key themes of population geography. So I guess my point here is that if we trace the discipline back, really, really far back, the subdiscipline back, even to the 17th century, which was heavily implicated with the colonial project. So William Petty did lots of stuff in colonial Ireland at the time. I guess my point here is that there are very subtle ways in which colonialism endures into population geography. I'm just wondering whether we're thinking through and challenging some of those enduring legacies. There's some really fantastic work by non-geographers like Charlotte Sussman, who looks at kind of political arithmetic and the politics behind it, quite literally. And I guess what I'm interested in finding out from this group, perhaps in today's conversation, but moving forward, is I think there's lots of great conversations in the special issues about how we're going to be moving forward in population geography. I wasn't really sure about the ethics of the why, and whether we could also maybe think through some of the epistemological questions about why we're doing what we're doing and the ethics underpinning that. I'm thinking specifically here about new forms of data and how we collect data in the contemporary age and how we might collect data moving forward. So thinking very much about, Web 3.0 doesn't exist currently, but the talk about the decentralization of kind of data sets and the use of AI, for example. I think these are debates that are happening, data valence. These are debates happening, I think, very much outside of population geography. I'll have to see them happening within. So I guess my key point in this slide is much about, when I looked at your three key themes from the area special issue, it really resonated the work I'm doing as part of British Academy grant on how we calculate migration statistics, and traced all the way back to William Petty and the things he was doing in colonial Ireland. So I hope that's some points for reflection. So thank you, Francisco. Was that about 5 minutes?
Yeah, that is perfect timing. Thank you. Thank you, James, for keeping that within the time. And yeah, so some interesting reflections there that I think worth considering for the discussion later. So now I would like to introduce our fourth speaker, Professor Brenda Yeoh. Let me know if I pronounce your name correctly. So I hope I did. So she's professor at so it's a Raffles Professor of Social Sciences at the National University of Singapore and research lead of the Asian Migration Cluster at the same institution. Her research interest focuses on Asian migration, expanding a variety of different themes, so involving gender, social reproduction, care migration, skill migration, higher education, international student mobility, marriage migrants, and cultural politics. So she recently was awarded the Outrin Lute Prize for Outstanding Achievements in Geography. So this was early this year, 2021. The screen is yours, Brenda.
Right. Thank you, Francisco, for that generous introduction. And thank you for including me in this panel. Congratulations again to the PopGRG group. This is a reflection largely from the margins rather than centrally. And I just want to first refer to the reflections on the Golden Jubilee editorial that the authors put together, where the important line there that struck me is that population geography's diversity is at once its challenge and its strength. So they make the point that a fuller understanding of human experience over a diversity of times, places, and geographies can only be reached if there are urgent steps taken to decolonize the subdiscipline. So I follow this lead from the perspective of Asia. So one of the first battles to be fought if population geography is to become more inclusive is, as James has already mentioned, an epistemological one. So to quote my colleague James Sidaway that whilst any post-colonial geography is inescapably marked by its location and development as a Western colonial science, constructive response, in my view, is not to, of course, reject Western discourses and methods, but to provincialize such scholarship. And for me, this requires recognizing its place, that its place and value is inextricably wedded to its historical and social context. So I started life as a historical geographer, so that's where I come from as well. So the stuff of textbook population geography, from demographic transition to urban segregation, these models sometimes don't transpose very well to other social, cultural, economic contexts. So instead, developing population geography in the context of Asia needs to draw insights from, for example, Chen's idea of Asia as method. So treating Asia as method means mobilizing the diverse historical experiences and the rich social practices of Asia to provide alternative horizons and perspectives. So this is a first step towards theorizing from the South that we all talk about, rather than just using the South as a testing ground for theories based on experiences of the North. So let me illustrate what I mean from migration research in Asia. So whilst permanent migration pathways are narrowing worldwide, temporary migration has been the mainstay of transnational labor circulation in Asia from the very beginning. It is hence important not only to focus more attention on researching temporary migration regimes in Asia, but it's crucial to deploy a different set of conceptual lenses. And I'll illustrate this through 4 examples. And that's the end of the short talk after these 4 examples. So the first is that as population geographers, we often try to understand the place of the migrant in host society, and this often draws on Western-centric paradigms of assimilation, multiculturalism, and integration. But in Asian host societies, we need other approaches based on notions of enforced transience or permanent temporariness in order to understand the precarious conditions under which migrant workers are permitted to labor but not to stay. This shifts the focus to the politics of non-integration rather than integration, and this is often enacted through social and spatial strategies of control and containment. So instead of focusing on ethnic residential enclaves, which are often seen as a key indicator of integration in white majority countries, for example, there's a need to direct attention to non-residential migrant concentrations, such as ephemeral weekend enclaves in Asia's arrival cities. So that's just a short illustration. A second example is based on the idea that temporary migration in the Asian context cannot be separated from the migration and development discourse. So the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the inbuilt precarity of temporary migration. And as transnational mobility stalls and states retreat into the cocoon of economic nationalism, the sustainability of temporary migration as a panacea for development is becoming a very important topic on research agendas. Thirdly, the increasing feminization of labor migration in Southeast Asia also deserves more attention. In this light, the incorporation of a family perspective in migration studies is something that's crucial, primarily because women are still considered the linchpin of the Asian family, where the absences are censured, whilst men's migration is often normalized as masculine endeavor. And fourthly, and finally, anyone researching migration in the Asian context will be aware that migration is a heavily mediated process involving the orchestration amongst a diverse set of actors. So whilst the term migration industry often connotes pejorative meanings, it also helps to alert us to the significant role that's played by a wide range of actors, recruiters, brokers, placement agents, and so forth in organizing and facilitating migration. So shifting attention to the migration industry and adopting migration brokers as a methodological vantage point, to me, is an important productive move in working on migration in Asia. So in sum, and if I could just have a few more seconds, decolonizing population geography involves shifting the locus of the subdiscipline. This certainly requires more resources, more research to be directed to the non-West, where the vast majority of the world's population live, but it has to go beyond that. Attending to social political context and recovering conceptual insights that respect human experience as lived will take us one step closer towards invigorated and more diverse population geography. And to go back to earlier presentations, this will hopefully destabilize the relationship between the center and the periphery. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, for those reflections on Asian migration and some of the components that should be considered and integrated into the population migration thinking. So now moving on to our next speaker, Sarah Marie Hall. So she's a reader in human geography and currently a UKRI Future Leader Fellow at the University of Manchester. So her research interest focus on geographical feminist political economy, particularly analyzing how socioeconomic processes are shaped by gender relationships, lived experiences, and social differences. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. They are some very hard acts to follow. Okay, what's that got to do with geography? So this question, and more of a statement, would ring in my ears. My friends who studied English literature would ask it. The girls on my corridor who found me reading when they picked me up for tea would ask it. My mum wondered the same, but she didn't ask. She just had this quizzical look on her face. Each time I would respond with this newfound confidence that I'd found at university, that in fact, geography is everywhere. Didn't you know? The thing that I'm talking about was the book Ways of Seeing by John Berger. And when I was asked to be part of this panel celebrating the Population Geography Research Group, and thanks so much again for asking me to do this, it was the first thing that came to mind. I was in the second semester of my first year at university, studying for a BA in geography at the University of Liverpool. Geography, I was soon learning, really is everywhere. I'd been introduced to the late Bob Woods. I'm sure many of you knew of or knew Bob personally, a very well-known population geographer, in my first semester on a module called Population and Societies, along with Claire Holdsworth, Bill Gould, who I think is here, and Paul Williamson, to be later joined in time by, I think, Nisa Finney and Gemma Catney also taught on that course. So Liverpool geography was and still is a sort of heartland for population geography. And with an all-star cast, this first semester module was described as broad brush about populations and societies. But suffice to say, no matter how hard I tried, a budding demographer I was not. Come second semester, and Bob Woods popped up again, this time to teach population and historical geography. But this time it looked totally different. I wondered at first if he'd gone rogue. What would the other lecturers think if they knew that he was teaching about ordinary lives, about literature and experience, about looking and seeing, like the titles of just some of his lectures, as being population geography? And how do I remember this? Well, my mum dug out the handbook, which remains totally intact from 18 years ago, just last week. It's complete with notes, little quotes from Bob, and all the library reference codes if I ever wanted to go back and get those books out. I absolutely devoured the reading list. It included Ginsberg's The Cheese and the Worms, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and Ways of Seeing by John Berger. And the latter of these is one of my all-time favourites. I recommend it to everyone all the time. And I still have that copy that I bought all those years ago for the module that Bob taught. I've decided to give this talk in a sort of personal vignette style to reflect back on population geography. And I was inspired by the readings that we were given that you've heard about earlier with that personal approach. Has been a subfield that's taught me about the importance of social difference and social experience. that populations aren't out there, that they're in here, that how and where and when lives are lived, the social structures that determine or enable them, and the role of race, class, and gender in experiences of knowledge and the knowledge of experience are all really central issues. These are not, of course, issues that only concern population geographers, shock horror. The Economic Geography Research Group, which I've been a long-serving member of, has been embarking on its own mission, particularly over the last 3 years, to pluralise what and who our group engages and includes. And the Gender and Feminist Group, that I'm a newly minted committee member of, is collaborating with other research groups of the RGS-IBG to lead discussions in the discipline about the impact of care work in the academy. So coming full circle from that second semester in first year, I can now see how my own approach to what I find interesting about ordinary lives and experiences has been shaped by those early lessons in Liverpool. Exploring in my some of my current work, the relationship between austerity and reproduction, I found myself flicking through Bob's own monograph, Childhood Remembered, Responses to the Untimely Death in the Past, to reconsider the relationship between life course, intergenerationality, reproduction, mortality, and everyday experiences. But what I'd never reflected on before, and this talk has allowed me to do, is just how much of it draws on creative materials, portraits and poems and literature. It was published in 2006, 3 years after he taught me on that course. And now I do wonder, with reflection, if with those reading materials, Bob was introducing us to new ways of seeing and doing population geography and all the exciting possibilities that as a subfield it offers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that interesting reflection. So now I have the pleasure to introduce our last speaker, so Dr. Catherine Sauch. So Catherine is head of research and higher education at the Royal Geographical Society. Previously, she was a professor of geography at the Indiana University in the United States. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. My comments are going to be fairly brief because I think there have been some really important points made by all of the previous panelists, and I'm keen that we move to the discussion. But I want to join with other panelists in commending everyone who's been involved in these reflections associated with this particular anniversary. I'm not going to get into the debate of when the group was founded and whether it's the oldest research group. I don't have that much confidence in the IBG and the RGS-IBG archives. But we often get wrapped up in the day-to-day, the latest email, the latest deadline, and we don't pause enough to reflect, to celebrate, to reset, as well as to critique. And I think occasions like this are really important, and I think we're already seeing that demonstrated in the quality of the comments, referring to the papers that we've been given to read and the responses so far. Study groups within the IBG, research groups now within the RGS-IBG, are and have been really important institutions, particularly in and for British geography. And I think this is a point that's already been picked up importantly. They also play a critical role in defining those institutions of which they're part. First the IBG and now the RGS-IBG. And I think that there are many being recognised through these series of reflections who have enabled change, who've challenged, who've provoked, who's encouraged both of those institutions to develop and to become what they are today. And I think you can see those legacies in society's contemporary work. There's absolutely no question that research groups have and do shape subdisciplines. The knowledge and what's valued as knowledge, methods and methodological norms, and they create and foster networks, and with that collaborations, opportunities and careers. They also create all sorts of other disciplinary infrastructure, email lists, social media feeds, newsletters, conferences, journals, and through awards, they recognize and they institutionalize excellence and contributions. And importantly, they also help to define and set cultures, practices, and set norms. And we've heard some positive comments in that particular regard. And I think all of these things are particularly true of the Population Geography Research Group. And I think another important thing to really bring out is this is largely done by volunteers, members of the community who take on these roles, who provide the labour, the creativity, the imagination. It's not just time. And I think that's really important to recognize for all of you, all collectively, who've been involved in this group over the last 50 years. But also what comes with this is responsibilities. And I think we've started to touch on some of these, for groups to be open, to be welcoming, to be inclusive of a plurality of voices, of a breadth of perspectives and experiences and of contexts, to challenge and address exclusions, to model and uphold expectations of appropriate behavior, and to call that out when it's transgressed. And picking up a point that Phil made right at the start, and to bring that expertise and offer new insights to important global challenges, to issues that are at the fore, nationally, regionally, and locally, as well as internationally. And on this, I'd argue that population geographers are not absent from the public and policy debates. They may be by name, and on that, I think we can all collectively do a much better job, and that might be a focal point we can pick up. But I'd also encourage, as the group moves forward and starts moving forward, to reach out a little also beyond academia, to look at those who are doing research in professional and policy practice, not just in the public sector, where we often look, in the ONS, bodies such as that, but also in the private and third sectors, where I think some really important and challenging research topics are being addressed. And to engage with some of those informed ethical debates that are also out there. I did challenge the population geographers to get involved with things like the Locust Charter, for example, as one particular illustration. So I think it's really important on occasions like this, and I think that the papers that were shared with the panel to read ahead of this event is very good about this, about being self-critical, and I think that's important. I think it's also to be really celebratory on these occasions. As I look through those materials, and I've heard some of the comments here, I think this group has shown itself to be adept, to be responsive, to be open, to be flexible, to be permeable to new ways of thinking, new forms of data, new methods, new topics of inquiry. And I think all of that is enabling a much richer and a much fuller understanding of the complexity of human lives and of geography. And so I think it's a really exciting time for the group. And I'm particularly keen to hear some of the kind of comments and discussions that are now going to follow. But thank you to everybody who's been involved in this group, in the present, and importantly also in the past. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all the speakers for the reflections. So I think they've been very inspiring and putting some of the topics of discussion to perspective. So now what I'm gonna do, so we have a Q&A session. So I'm gonna pass it over to Gemma, who is gonna be sharing the Q&A session. So over to you, Gemma.
Thanks, Francisco, and thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the panel for really enjoyable and important reflections and celebrations and the raising of challenges facing population geography and the PopGRG research group. All of those contributions have given us plenty of food for thought as we move into this question and answer session. Please do post your questions in the chat or even raise your hand as we move through to this Q&A session. We'd also encourage you to share reflections on population geography on your experiences of the research group and population geography as a whole. On that note, I'm actually going to share the reflections of someone who couldn't be with us today, given another commitment, just to kind of maybe inspire some other reflections, following on from what Catherine has said about you know, the celebration element of today. So Emeritus Professor John Stillwell of the University of Leeds sent some comments and some really nice personal reflections. I'm just going to share a couple of those. So John joined the RGS PopGRG research group as a postgrad student in 1977 on Phil Rees's advice. He says that he met a community of UK population geographers, some working in my own subfield of migration or in related fields, many of whom became colleagues and remain so far for the remainder of my career. As a new PhD student, it was of great benefit to know the people whose work I was reading in the literature and whose work was often on the frontier of research in population geography. He goes on to say how PopGRG collaborations took him to across the world, to the Netherlands, the US, Germany, Sweden, and France, for example, and he met colleagues who became friends for life. John, as secretary, helped set up the International Journal of Population Geography, which eventually became, of course, Population Space and Place, and was also involved in setting up the new journal Applied Population and Policy. So John says that he has benefited from being part of the Population Geography Research Group, and he feels very grateful for having been involved, and to the people he has worked with or got to know. So he said it's always been a relatively small but very dedicated group, and one of the most active of all the RGS research groups, addressing contemporary issues across the board using qualitative and quantitative methods. And it's been particularly rewarding to see the transformation of the International Journal of Population Geography into PSP, which has become one of the leading international journals of population geography. So just again, to reiterate, it would be great to hear some reflections in that celebratory kind of element of today. Keith Haffercray also noted in the chat that Professor Paul Boyle, now Vice-Chancellor of Swansea University, remembers fondly his population geography days as well. So to kick off, please, again, as I said, just post questions, comments in the chat, that'd be fantastic. But we're gonna, I'm just gonna pose some particular discussion points to start those conversations off. So here are a few, and these can be taken in whatever order or not, but some reflections based on what we've heard so far. How do we start off shifting the epistemological location of population geography in response to James's question? What conceptual lenses might we employ to theorize from the South in relation to Brenda's call? And related to that, we need a more cohesive, separate and Indigenous research. And those are comments from Hannah and Lavanya through the chat. Thank you for those. What are the natures of different cultures within population geography in different countries? How can PopGRG internationalize to enlarge the collegiality based on what George has commented? Related to that, how can population geography compete, if you like, or engage with demographers, economists and think tanks in presenting evidence that is used by policymakers, and are we lagging behind? That reminds me of Darren Smith's contribution to Progress in Human Geography and the opportunities that we have as population geographers, but also how we maybe could be doing a lot more. So Darren, you might want to come in on that as well. So those are a few things to start off with. That doesn't by any means reflect all of the contributions so far, but maybe that could kick things off. If anyone wants to go ahead, you can unmute your microphone and turn your camera on. Feel free to go ahead, no need to raise your hand to speak.
Phil, do you want to come in?
Did you say me or?
If you're willing to, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Right. Okay. I'll start off. I'm not question mark. I'm Elspeth Graham from St Andrews. I don't know why my name's not up. I wanted actually to pick up something that Phil said, and that you haven't actually noted as a discussion point, but I think it is one, because it links to a number of things that were said by others as well. And that's the importance of impact. And I wonder whether in the UK context, this has actually been skewing population geography a little bit. While impact is obviously important for funding and all sorts, has it perhaps encouraged a look, a narrowness in British population geography to look at the UK? It's so much easier to demonstrate impact within a small area like the UK than international impact. So I just wonder if there's some skew there, but also this relates to other comments. Often when population geographers do make impact, they're not noted as population geographers. And that, I think, is something to do with public awareness of what geography is, which relates to what Sarah was saying about what's this got to do with geography. And so we could possibly do better there, but internationalizing population geography, especially British population geography, seems to me very important, but we have to think it through in terms of the impact we can make and the impact we can make as population geographers.
Thank you for that, Elspeth. So do any of the panel members want to respond, or indeed the floor is open to others, of course, as well.
Gemma, I think Phil wants to come in.
Sorry, I can't see all of the hands. Thank you, Phil. Please do.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Yeah, thanks for those remarks about impact by several of you. I think that's absolutely crucial for the future of population geography. I mean, I've sat in meetings with the former director of UKRI at the invitation of Paul Boyle, and allowed one slide, not 5 minutes, just one slide to present, and he told me to shut up halfway through the slide. And he was clearly not interested in social science one iota. Thank God he's now retired from his post as head of UKRI. But that's the kind of tide that we're swimming against. And then a second point to make is really to stress the example that I mentioned about developing really impactful products, if you like, everyone uses, that David Martin did with his work on output geography. And that was really a lesson that we need to be co-producing. We only get the, if you like, the trust of outside organizations if they are brought along step by step while we're doing our work. And we don't do very much of that. Sometimes it can be entirely unsuccessful. I did a project for Thames Water. They wanted to know what their water demand was going to be in the future, and so they could know how many reservoirs and underground storage aquifers to build up. And I introduced ethnicity into those projections because they had told me from looking at their household records that South Asian households consume more water than other kinds of households. So they wanted an ethnic projection not supplied by the Office for National Statistics. So we beavered away at this in what I consider very innovative work. The end result was they rejected all of our projections, despite having asked for exactly what only we could deliver. And they rejected that because government decided that one size fits all. And if you didn't agree with the official national projections, then your projection was going to be binned. Well, I mean, that's an unfortunate attempt at co-production. It's very, very difficult. And you've got to build up more trust than I was able to build up with Thames Water, and the kind of trust that David Martin was able to build up with Office for National Statistics.
Thank you, Phil. I am sorry, I can't see raised hands for some reason, so feel free to just jump in if you have something that you'd like to contribute or respond to Phil's comments or to some of the other issues that we've heard about.
I guess it's more of a reflection than a comment, but I think this whole kind of looking back at the last 50 years has really impressed me the importance of history. So just hearing Elspeth and Phil talk, for example, Phil mentioned how, the value of geography has almost been questioned. We're talking about population geography, but geography more broadly. And it takes us back to the post-war period where the same conversation was happening, right? Where the value of geography as a discipline was being massively questioned. And we found a way to get through that. But I agree with Phil's point that we do have these moments where geography as a discipline is questioned. I guess what I found fascinating is that we're currently talking about trying to find a way to internationalize population geography to make it more relevant. But if we think about William Petty and demography in the 17th century, it's always been international. One of the key reasons population geography and demography emerged was to do censuses in the colonies. No, population geography has always been international. So my question more about the nature of that international engagement is what I think is actually quite fascinating. But I guess my point is just a silly, facetious one to say that actually we've always been international. Population geography being international is not new. It started as an international, I guess if you think of demography and population geography as somewhere connected, not the same thing, but connected. We've always been international. As I said, we're out in, the British are out in the colonies doing censuses and doing things that they couldn't do in the local population because they were being criticized, and it's quite politicized to count local population. So my question is really actually that, again, we've always been international. I think for me, it's the nature of the international engagement that I think we need to maybe think through. And that's my point about the social location not necessarily being different to the epistemological location. And all I mean by that is that you can engage with scholars in other parts of the world internationally, but their ways of thinking, ways of being, ways of knowing actually mirror very close to what we're doing in the West. That's not an epistemological shift. I think what Brenda was talking about in her talk really kind of spoke to actually thinking of ways to have an epistemological shift as part of an international agenda. So I hope that was just a reflection rather than a comment, but I agree with Phil definitely in terms of how geography as a discipline is definitely being questioned at the moment in terms of relevance, especially with STEM and being seen as being so prominent. So really good reflections, Phil.
Thanks, James. That's really, really interesting and helpful. Perhaps linking some of those reflections and thinking about looking back as well as forward, and in relation to Sarah's illustration of the richness of Bob Woods' contributions in the 1990s, maybe it's something that we could think about as a group is what work and approaches should we revisit and revive. So again, maybe another topic to stimulate discussion. Anyone wants to come in?
So, Gemma, so I guess just raising a new discussion point, I guess. So we've seen in lots of different areas of site population geography an increase in the discussion, the use and the study of big data to advance social sciences in many different ways. My sense is that as population geography, we have been lagging behind on the use and discussion of all these new technologies and the ways how they can actually improve, complement what we currently do. So, and I guess and I think it's absolutely critical to start discussing some of these issues going forward, and that's because so there are emerging subfields, subdisciplines like computational social sciences, for example, and my sense is that they are shaping the landscape in the way of what is research in the field, but also the funding landscape. So they are getting to shape what is being, how and what we should be doing in terms of research and what the research goals should be about. So I would like to get some views on what you think. So generally for the group on what you think and whether that is something that we should be doing, and probably so there are also already existing research in that area. I mean, I know a few people working on that, but I would like to know the view of the group more widely.
Thank you for that. So again, if anyone wants to contribute, but I'm aware that Nicola Shelton, you had your hand up as well. So while we reflect on Francisco's point there, Nicola, if you want to come in.
Thanks very much, Gemma. I've shared one teaching related memory in the chat, and I've got another one. It's in relation to Bill Gould. Hello, Bill. In part of our PhD training, he was discussing the ethics of his research in Africa, and that he'd done some work for the World Bank and that this had been conflicting for him. And I asked him who would do the research if geographers didn't, and he replied, economists. And it's that thing about thinking about the ethics of our research, but thinking about what happens if we don't do the work. So just a point, but in relation to teaching, I think the importance of teaching population geography to a wide range of audience, because I teach outside of geography, is that it's really important that people hear what population geography is. Thanks.
Thank you. Any responses to Nicola's point and also to Francisco's as well?
I think Nisa got her.
Yeah, I'll go to Nisa next while everyone reflects on those. Thanks, Nisa.
Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, so thinking about the fabulously thought-provoking comments about shifting the epistemological location of population geography and the need to look back as well as forward. One thing that strikes me is the disconnect now largely between population geographies and development geographies. And it may well be because I'm now in a school where there's strong population work and there's strong development work and some conversations between. And I'd be really interested in the thoughts from people here. There are a number of people here who have worked at that crossover of development and population about how we might revive some of those connections, particularly thinking about this shifting of our epistemological locations.
Thanks, Nisa. Any comments on those reflections from the panel members or more broadly from attendees?
Perhaps if I could just chip in on the question of methodological pluralism. I mean, from the outside, I mean, often British geography is associated with more social cultural kind of approach. That's the image from the outside, whereas American geography is usually associated with GIS, and that's the strength. So I'm simplifying things, but what I guess I'm trying to say is that in population geography, there is a very good basis and for bringing together different kinds of methodologies to bear on global questions, because the skills that population geographers have are both span the qualitative, the quantitative, the digital, the visual, and if population geography can, in a sense, leverage on these kinds of skills and bring these together, this will make for a much stronger approach, a more multifaceted approach to either global problems or even local problems. Yeah, that's the small thing that I wanted to say in response to Francisco's urge that we look at AI and big data.
Thank you. Francisco, do you want to come back on that?
I mean, not necessarily. I just I'm interested in the views of people here. So whether that is an area where we should be making or actively contributing to and kind of embrace the adoption and discussions about these new technologies, because I really think that they can enhance and complement what we, so the type of data that we use, and thinking also that, so now population geography, so human behavior is shaping the way how we use technologies, but at the same time, technologies are shaping the ways how we actually act, what we buy, what we see, who we connect with. So I think there is a very strong connection between the two. So that's why, and this is across the board. So in terms of using methodologies, new data sources, but also about the actual topics, the research areas that we can start exploring from now on.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is take some comments from the chat, and then I can see at least one other hand up as well. So if some good points from Joseph and Ayavanya as well. If either of you want to unmute your microphones, you're very welcome to verbalize your questions. Please do so.
I mean, I will. I don't really have a question as such. Hello, everyone, by the way. Yeah, it's just there was discussion about who would do work if geographers didn't and it was economists. I mean, I think all these things are inherently problematic, and I think Nisa brought it up that the overlap between population geography and development, there's this whole ethical minefield of maybe nurturing a desire, and it all comes off very imperialistic, and it's just take caution when you're like proceeding with these things, rather than a question. It was more of like just a point of intrigue, I guess.
Thank you for it. And staying on that theme, Bonnie, do you want to come in with your comment in the chat since it's related?
Hi there. I can, although it is a bit of a broad question, and I think it's maybe a question to people who've been around for a bit longer. And my question has to do with impact. And so from my very limited experience being within academia, I've seen that there are different roles or different hats an academic can wear, and teaching is just one of them. And so I just wonder, I think the simple form of this question is, why has teaching or education, or why does it come across as less glamorous and less impactful compared to other activities? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I've done a small analysis in which I was just looking at the meta landscape of publications. And it just seems that within population geography, and most disciplines actually, there's a trend of more being published. So with an exponential increase of information available, why doesn't it seem as glamorous to reflect back on that in the form of teaching?
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks, Bonnie. There are two hands up. I think they preceded your question, so I'm not sure their response to that. But if there are any responses to Bonnie, please do even put your hand up. I'm finally seeing hands, which is good. So I'll take the next two questions or comments in the order, and then we can revisit that if anyone has something they want to contribute. So Chris, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. In relation to Francisco's comment, I mean, I had a few thoughts that related to what he had said, and a number of other issues that were raised as well. But in relation to the theme of big data, I think we're at an interesting point as population geographers in a variety of ways. I mean, a lot of us concern ourselves greatly with the quality of data. So we see a lot around how reliable small area data are, if you were with the census, for example. Yet in a world of big data, the challenges are rather different. You can be working with very biased, partial data sets. That's not to say they're not useful, but they have very different characteristics. So I think there are a lot of debates around the value and the use of data that population geographers probably should be playing more of a role in, to try to shape the ways that they're used, and to provide more critical insight into the degree of understandings that they can offer. So I would agree with that, where I think Francisco's coming from, that population geographers should be playing more of a role and bringing some of that critical knowledge of what data can and can't tell us, and the ways in which they can be reliably used to provide insights. So definitely, I think that there's a lot that population geographers could contribute, which also makes me think of going back to Elspeth's comment about impact and the international settings. If you think of people like Andy Tatum at Southampton and the World Pop Project, I don't know if Andy would describe himself as a population geographer, yet he's overseeing a really large project which is trying to do things like use a variety of diverse data sources, some of which might come under the bracket of big data, to understand migration trends at the small area, fertility, deprivation, and so on. So we've got a fusion of things there that relate to what Francisco's talking about in terms of data sources. Also a bit on the identity of population geographers, because we've got other people doing what we might call population geography who perhaps aren't often seen as population geographers. And there's also the international perspective that ties into some of Francisco's comments about trying to make use of diverse data sources. And if you're trying to do things like standardize understandings of poverty in small areas across the world, by definition, you're not always using high quality census data. And it might be that you need to make use of diverse, perhaps non-traditional data sources as far as population geographers go. So a bit rambling, but those were a few comments on some of the things that have come up recently. But thanks to everyone who's organised this session. It's been really interesting.
Thanks, Chris. George, I don't know if your comment or question relates to that theme. There are a couple of comments in the chat that do, but please go ahead. With your hand's been up for a while. Thanks, George.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma, and thanks, Chris. I think it's kind of pretty much what I wanted to say. Chris said quite a lot of it, and just in relation to what Francisco was saying about big data, and just from my experience of what has been thrown about in Australia about our census and a potential move away from having a 5-yearly census to something that might be a lot more frequent and something that resembles a lot, there's not going to be a total population survey, and we might be running sample surveys and things like that. And I think a lot of, demographers who probably are geographers to start with are going to be playing an important role in a discussion moving forwards. Now, I don't think any significant change will happen in the next census, which will be in 2026, but potentially in 2031, we might start to see some shifts if it's going to happen. And I think one of the things population geographers should probably do in the lead up to that is actually have a really robust discussion about what would it mean to have a census in a different form. And I think one of my concerns would be how do we report on ethnicity and identity. So we have questions in census asking people to indicate what their ancestries are, first generation, the first ancestry, second ancestry, and migration in Australia is a country built on immigrants. From early, after the war, we've had a lot of migrants coming from the UK. And through the late 1900s, we've got people from Vietnam and from the Balkans. And since the turn of the century, we've had a lot of Asian immigrants who have really transformed the nature of migrants in the country. So I think in that regard, population geographers probably should have some input into how the census should look like moving forwards if we're going to move away from what we currently do. And if we're going to adopt big data approaches, it's going to be a lot more complex to if we want to have a snapshot of what the country sees itself or identifies itself when it comes to ancestry and things like that.
Thank you for that, George. And related to this theme, there's some comments in the chat around the UK census, and from Lisa, from Ollie, some interesting points for those following in the chat as well. And there are some important questions there around how data are produced, constructed, misused as well. I am conscious that time is moving on. I think I'm just going to take Darren's point because I'm surprised it didn't come up more in the chat, in the discussion, I suppose. Darren, I don't know if you want to verbalize what you've put in the chat, or you want me to do that on your behalf. The floor is yours if you want to.
Thanks, Gemma. I'll do my best. My internet connection is not good, so I may drift in and out. Apologies. I think that the subdiscipline population geography is in a really good place. I think we're in a really strong place. You can see the folks on the screen, but I think Catherine Souch touched upon it. We have some big challenges that we face. We perhaps at a moment in time where as a subdiscipline we need to grapple more effectively with some of the questions that we should be addressing. I see very little, and I'm sure Brenda and Clarence and Aileen did it before. We see very little coming through on climate migration, for example, in population, space and place. We see very little coming through, although increasingly work on COVID, the effects of COVID and so on. I know work's getting done on that, but I think there's some really big challenges that we should be feeding into more effectively as a subdiscipline. And I think the question is, how do we do that? I think that's the challenge we need to think about. How do we connect with those discourses and those other subdisciplines and other disciplines across the social sciences? I haven't got the answer, but I guess just a call and a shout out to encourage folks to be grappling with these questions more effectively.
Thanks, Darren. I don't know if anyone wants to come in on that. We have about 2 minutes left. Chris Fido in the chat has echoed his appreciation for Sarah Marie's evocation of Bob Woods' Catholic sense of what sources and ways of seeing worlds might be valuable for population geography. And thanks for that comment as well. Some more comments on the census. I think it's probably time isn't on our side to raise any other new things, but I would like to pass the opportunity over for any kind of remaining burning comments or questions. Rory, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a new point that I've only just thought of quite late in the day, so I'm not sure it's perhaps the right time to think about it. But we've heard a lot about kind of really big challenges facing population geography and some of the kind of strengths, one of which seems to be the collegiality of the group. And one of the things I've just been thinking of is that there's no way that any one person or one small team of people can ever deal with some of these challenges. And can we somehow leverage the kind of the wisdom of the crowd of everybody here somehow to make better use of all these different kind of perspectives and kind of insights that people have been giving along the way? So instead of working, can we move to a more collaborative sort of team-based model of at least, you know, working in some way to kind of try and take on board some of the things that people have been saying around big data, around kind of the need for decolonization and new epistemic perspectives, etc. I can't see one person or even one team of people ever being able to deal with most of these issues at once. We're going to have to work, I think, more in new ways, like we have been doing in the last sort of 18 months at home, sort of collaboratively, asynchronously, I think. So I'm kind of just trying to think of a way that PopGeog can kind of move towards a more sort of collaborative model of working, perhaps, instead of sort of sitting in our own rooms a little bit, which might help overcome some of these challenges. That's it from me. There's loads of other things. It's been a really good session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rory. Really important and helpful points too. Sarah, please.
Rory has just expressed exactly the point that I was tapping in the chat. Maybe not very appropriate coming from me. I'm a bit of a cuckoo here because obviously my main field is geography of health and well-being, but we're part of the RGS, and the RGS has really quite strong resources to help us to perhaps open up that debate in collaboration with colleagues from other fields and also from key people from the sort of policy and government and public agency world. So maybe rather than worrying about whether we're really making the case for population geography, another way forward or an additional way forward may be to say, let's think about some really big issues for society at the moment, and maybe approach the RGS to see whether we could open up a debate that's quite broad, but which clearly features input from health, from population geographers.
That's a fantastic idea. Thank you, Sarah. Catherine, I'm not sure if you wanted to respond to that.
I'd be very happy to respond to that. I've had a bit of a parallel chat going with Darren as well in terms of encouraging him to pick up some of the conversations. But absolutely, I mean, let's use the fact that we now all can be enabled to interact much more easily and without kind of distance getting in the way online. There are forums, there are various different types of events. It picks up on my point about engaging with professional and policy geographers, many of whom are active researchers. They're not just in terms of implementation or development of policy, but they're active researchers too, to encourage some of these debates. Around big data, around the ethics of the use of big data, the locus charter discussions which are going on at the moment, which are all about ethical principles and the use of location data, and population data is absolutely critical in that. So very, very strong conversations. You know, maybe it's a series of kind of rolling forums or discussions with subgroups, but yes. If I'm here to represent the RGS is listening and we'd be very happy to support those. So thank you, Sarah, for providing that opportunity.
I think that's really exciting and maybe the best note to end on for the question and answer session. So thank you so much again to all the panel members, and thank you to all of you for those fantastic questions and comments. There are so many, and I think we're just getting started. As Nisa said at the start, there is an opportunity to carry on the conversation afterwards as well. But for now, I'm just going to move on. And I should also say thank you to Nisa for collating some of those comments too, which made my job of multitasking a lot easier. So I'm just going to pass over to Sophie next.
Hi, everyone. So I have the Well, I volunteered to provide a summary and to look forward, and slightly regretting that now because I don't think I can truly summarize everything that everybody said. So as a form of summary, what I'm going to do is just to say thank you. And just to have a few reflections on where we might go next in terms of population geography and the population geography research group in the next 50 years. And actually the images on the slide here are from the schools competition that we mentioned earlier. So these are pictures of representations from school children of what they think population geography is. So from the discussions that we've had today, I think perhaps what we want to do is to pose a series of questions of what we as a research group and what population geography can think about in the next 50 years. So how do we focus on promoting or thinking or understanding the geographies of population? So I think there's kind of really key sense of you've got population geography, but we want to really promote a geographical understanding of population. And this can be geographies in terms of locations as to which knowledge, theories and epistemologies that we use come from. This is a reflection of the histories that we draw upon, and these histories go all the way back into the colonial era, as well as thinking about the current contemporary practices and structures that we want population geographers in their 100th anniversary to be celebrating. Obviously, a will to diversify is not the same as actually doing it, and we don't know yet necessarily what this is going to look like, and that's really a challenge for us going forward in the next 50 years. And I'd also want to say that are we as a population geography research group, are we necessarily the best people placed to lead conversations on epistemologies from or theories from the global south when we are predominantly a British based group? And that's a question that we will pick up as part of our research group and develop further. Another kind of key question that we can think about is what can a geography of population contribute to an understanding of methods, of big data, of ethics, of different ways of seeing the world, and what can lots of different disciplines look at issues to do with population, but what do geographers specifically contribute to these discussions? And I think actually some of these points about ethics are kind of really key there. And lastly, one of the key points that I think has come out from today is thinking about what can a geographical understanding of population contribute to impact, to knowledge exchange. And I think about impact here, not just in terms of policy, but also in terms of teaching. So in terms of how we inspire future generations of people who may not go into academia, but actively go out and shape the world around us. And Rory really nicely summed up the point that I was going to make at the end is how do we do this? Like what kind of operations, what kind of work can we do as a research group and as a community to shape that? So those are some questions for us to consider in the next 50 years, and hopefully we'll be around at the 100th anniversary of the research group to see how we did. But in the short term, let's think about what we're going to do in the next year. So as I'm currently the chair of the Population Geography Research Group, we have a set of activities that we're going to have in the next year. And the first of these is a continuation of the archiving project. So as Nissa mentioned, that we've carried out a set of interviews with 14 people who are involved with the research group. However, we are very aware that this is only a limited and partial data set. So what we are going to do as a research group is we plan to carry out some more interviews. And I've raised this here now because if you think, oh, I should have been contacted and I haven't, well, it's likely that we are shortly going to contact you. But also, if you would like to volunteer to take part, then please email me, and I will put my email address in the chat in a minute. Another activity that we're going to have this year is a writing retreat that's going to be open to everyone, and that'll be an opportunity for us to bring up some of these questions again and think about them in relationship to some work that we're individually and collectively working on. We will continue to host our blog, and we really invite blog posts from everybody here. If anybody wants to write a blog post about this event, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have the IMIG Mob conference, and as part of the IMIG Mob conference, we're really pleased that we're going to be able to offer a series of early career bursaries. And I'll just put the slide up about the IMIG Mob conference in a second. But lastly, just here, kind of a little bit of an advert to please join us. Please join the research community as part of the RGS IBG through your membership. Please join our email list, and also, please look out for opportunities to join the committee. If we want to think about how do we steer some of these discussions, well, the committee is well placed to start putting some of these policies in place. But as Catherine said, this is all done on a volunteer basis, so the more volunteers we have, the better. And just to highlight here that the ideas about friendliness and collegiality do really fall through into how the group operates today. So as I mentioned, the Population Geography Research Group is involved in organising the IMIG MOB conference, the third international conference on migration and mobility, which will be held in St Andrews this year on between the 6th and 8th of July. So I really hope to see some of you there in July. Just to note here that St Andrews in July is absolutely beautiful. As long as it's nice sunny weather, lots of beaches, lots of really great conversations to be had. So what else could you want? So that's almost it from the event. That's almost it from us, but there is just one last thing to do. And that is to thank Nissa Finney. So Nissa stepped down as the chair of Population Geography this year. Nissa has really driven forward some of the key initiatives that we've been carrying out in population geography in the past 5 years. So the archiving project, this event, have all been led by her absolute fantastic organisation. As the incoming chair, I could only hope to live up to her standard, because I think she has really been an inspiration to the committee, and one of the people who really fosters this collegiality, friendliness of the group, fosters the best working practices in all of us. I think David McCollum should be in Nissa's office. I can't actually see anybody on the screen. Is David there?
David, hi.
So David just has a small token of our appreciation. To thank everybody who has taken part in this event, but just to thank thanks David, to thank David for handing over the gift, but it is a really small token of our appreciation to all of the great work that you've done, Nissa. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, David. I'm a bit taken aback by the knock on my door, but really this is, I've played a very small part in all that we've been celebrating today, and it's been wonderful to have the contributions from everybody, both before this meeting over the last few years and during this conversation. And I feel very excited following this discussion and looking forward to carrying on these conversations. So thank you to everybody who has made this possible and who has made population geography what it is today.
Did Monty enjoy the event, Suzanne?
He's fallen asleep now, so I don't know whether that means he's enjoyed it or not. There he is there.
Oh, Suzanne, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. He's very, very cute.
This is the second of our PopGeog committee baby this year.
I know, there's been a baby boom. Amazing. So I know, so he's great. 4 weeks old now. He's lovely.
I hope he's the only person who fell asleep.
I think he is. You're allowed to fall asleep when you're so
Yeah.
small, aren't you? Super sweet.
I know.
Oh,
I think it was one eye open there.
one eye open, exactly. Just one. Keeping an eye on what's going on. Yeah.
Hi, Vanya. Thanks for coming along and for your comments. It's good to meet you.
I need to nip off because I've got a meeting straight after this, but thank you all for everything. It's been quite
Yeah,
good.
thanks, Paula.
No worries.
Ollie, I'm really interested in these data sort of ethics debates and why are we collecting these data, who for?
Yeah, exactly.
In whose interest? And yeah, I'm thinking about it quite a lot, actually. I mean, Gemma and I were in an ONS ethnicity census workshop this morning, but also doing this even survey of ethnic and religious minorities. It was just really brought up these questions of, thanks, David, of who are we collecting data from and how is that received, and what are the responsibilities of that, as well as the ethics of the collection in the first place. So.
Yeah, and we've, I mean, the census is one thing, and we can use it to help us think about other things, but got these sort of huge identity questions in it that, I guess as population geographers, we're interested in those data. But yeah, why are we asking these questions?